one of the problems that many people have with Egypt is that they are familiar with many of the great buildings and the ruins, like the Great Pyramid. Many people are familiar with that. It's one of possibly the most famous single structure on the planet.
Right.
But there are many other buildings, specifically around Luxor, like the Luxor Temple and the Karnak Temple,
Yeah.
the Valley of the Kings, the Abu Simbel Temple that was moved in 1968 to stop it being drowned. But most of these were built by later pharaohs. They were built by Ramesses II. The Abu Simbel Temple was built by Ramesses II. Now, he was a pharaoh for about 60 years, so he had a lot of time to do these things. But he didn't. He was living around 1200 BC, quite recent in terms of what we perceive as being the more ancient Egypt, like
right.
the Egypt of the Great Pyramid, the Egypt of the Osirian at Abydos. Not the more modern temples. It's the older ones that I have the fascination with. Most of the more recent ones are very well documented. They're all made of limestone. It's very easy to carve limestone and sandstone. You can even use copper chisels on them, which is apparently all the Egyptians had to build these things with.
Right.
But you can't use copper chisels on granite.
No.
It doesn't work. So we got a problem.
I see what you mean, and exactly that's important to point out that, because again, we're not just talking about, no, they build it in stone. It's different properties to this, the character of the stone, what tools and metals you actually can use to build things with and so forth. So very important point to make again, and that image, it's fascinating, that one with the unfinished the obelisk at Abydos, right?
Yep. You'll see that there are scoop marks on top of the obelisk as well.
Right.
As in the trench around surrounding it.
Now, one more question before we actually need to pretty soon here talk a little bit about your appearance on the conference and so forth, because we are actually running out of time in our first hour. But before we do that, I just want to pop one more question about this by you, and that is, if this was melted, or whatever words you want to use there, the granite then, when this was made, do you think that, does this only, the liquid that's this, or bronze gas, does this only penetrate down to a certain level of the rock? What I'm getting at is that if this was true, wouldn't the entire, piece of granite there melt, or can it be applied in such a way that only, a few centimeters of this can be scooped out? Do you know?
I would say that is more likely to be the case, that it would be, let's assume that this liquid existed, or exists. What you would do is use it rather like, you would use paint stripper. You would paint it on the surface of the rock, and it would soften it down to, let's say, a depth of about 2 to 3 centimeters, which you could then scrape off or shape.
Right.
In the way that if you take, say, putty or plasticine, you can shape that quite easily. Or like clay, if you're making pottery, you can use the clay quite easily to shape any type of utensil.
Right.
With clay, obviously, you then have to bake it to harden it, and it becomes solid in a way that it cannot be then worked or shaped. In the same way, the granite could be softened once the the surplus material is removed. There may be an application of another material to harden it, to stop the process of softening, that would then immediately cause the granite, which of course was originally in molten form when it came out of the earth, because all granite is volcanic material.
Of course, yeah.
As opposed to sandstone, which is compressed sand, and limestone, which is compressed sand again.
Mm-hmm.
Those are quite different materials.
Right.
And shouldn't be confused in any way. Granite is a very hard material. If it is possible to soften it, you could then treat it almost like clay shape it into whatever shape you wanted.
Mm.
It wouldn't necessarily soften the whole thing, and I'm sure that the process could subsequently be reversed either by a passing of a period of time where the softening process ceased and it obtained whatever shape was subsequently molded into it, or another liquid was applied which would stop the process when the desired shape had been achieved. Because nobody knows what the answer is, I don't know what the answer is. All I can say is that this is a more likely explanation, given the evidence which actually does exist, than anything else. Now, one of the points that Christopher Dunn made very strongly, specifically about the granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, he took an engineering level, which is a piece of metal that is absolutely flat, and it's used in engineering to ensure that surfaces are flat. And he applied this, it basically looks like a short ruler, short piece of metal. And he discovered that the sides, the internal dimensions of the sarcophagus are mirror flat. They are so flat, it exceeds the requirement for opticians. Now, this is quite unnecessary if it's a sarcophagus, which is something that people get buried in. You don't need optical quality sides. He also discovered, and this is quite a well-known fact, that the sarcophagus inside the King's Chamber is one piece of granite. It is not 5 sides put together like a box. It is one piece of granite hollowed out. And the hollowing out was done with drills, because the marks are still visible. In the Cairo Museum, there are similar pieces where you can see drill marks. Now, to drill granite, you need diamonds, the only material that will cut granite. But we know the Egyptians did not have access to diamonds. The nearest diamonds to Egypt are actually the other side of Africa, 3,000 miles away, on the west coast, in Sierra Leone. So how do they cut it? Unless they had a technology that we're only beginning to discover today, which is ultrasonic drilling, where the material is actually vibrated at an extremely high speed and actually disintegrates. It is possible to do ultrasonic drilling on granite. So the evidence would appear to indicate that that was the technology they used in order to hollow out this remarkable box inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. They used ultrasonic drilling.
Fascinating.
Sort of drilling that you have on, when you visit your dentist today.
Fascinating. And again, this is just some of the inconsistencies, as it were, to what the official storyline gives and what kind of, at least as you said, these are possibilities that need to be considered if we are to get the full picture of what has been going on,
Indeed.
Yeah.
But, I do have a lot of sympathy for Egyptologists, because they may have spent a lifetime studying the subject, but they're beginning to discover, as the result of the work of many, shall we say, alternative historians and people looking for more logical explanations, that much of their work has still to be done. They may know the pharaohs, but they got the dates of those wrong as well. So let's leave that, shall we?
You know what we need to do like this, that we're approaching the end of our time together. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about the upcoming conference. Beyond Knowledge mentioned that, and also just we could do a kind of a brief overview, because we don't have time in this segment at least to go into all the subjects of what you will be discussing. But again, you will be talking about the moon landings there, and I want to mention here then that the Beyond Knowledge conference is taking place between the 3rd and 4th of May in Liverpool, England. So if you're interested in hearing either Marcus Allen here that we've been talking to here in this program today, or some other guys that will be attending, like David Hatcher Childress, Jerry Smith, Michael Tessarion, Ken Thomas, Ralph Ellis, Ian Crane, and David Griffin. Those are the speakers that will be on this conference. I suggest that you pop over to their website for more information about tickets, times, and how to get there and so forth. The website is beyond-knowledge.co.uk. Again, that's beyond-knowledge.co.uk. So, Marcus, if you will, tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about, an overview of your subject at the conference.
Right, indeed. The subject I'll be talking about at the Beyond Knowledge conference is the alleged Apollo moon landings. What do you mean alleged, I hear you say? They landed, didn't they? Well, that's what we've been told. I shall be looking at the evidence for the landings, and the evidence is mainly in the photographs and the films and the rocks and the books and the magazines and the fact that everybody knows that we landed on the moon. No. The evidence for the moon landings is extremely suspect. But I hear you say there are photographs of man on the moon. Yes, there are photographs that we were told by NASA showed men on the moon. Now, NASA, as we all know, stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and it is the civilian face of the American space program. What not everybody knows is that NASA was created in 1958 as a department of the Department of Defense.
Right.
It was the civilian face of the Department of Defense, which meant that if America, and don't forget this is 1958, before any American had been into space, but it was just around the time following Sputnik's launch in 1957, where America suddenly woke up to the fact that the Russians were so considerably more advanced than they were in space exploration. Russia launched Sputnik, and the implication being that if they could launch a small little beeping ball of metal up into the 200 miles up, they could launch a nuclear bomb, because that was the theory. And so America took fright, developed NASA, and said, we're going to land a man on the moon. Now, that was President Kennedy's famous statement in 1961. At that point, no American had been into space. They didn't know they could do it. But they thought, well, we have to say something to get the initiative back from the Russians. Because as we all know, America does not have the option of coming second to anybody.
Right.
So they decided to land a man on the moon. And they were going to do it live on television. Big mistake, doing it live on television. Supposing it all went wrong. Supposing you have an astronaut die in space live on television. This would not be acceptable. So, and this is my contention, that in order to achieve their by now dead president's challenge of landing a man on the moon, it was necessary to ensure that what America and the world saw was a man landing on the moon. The pictures, the photographs, the films that we were all shown were all produced by NASA, which, as we all know, stands for Never a Straight Answer.
There we go.
Which is what you get if you ask them questions they don't want to answer, such as details about the photographs. Why are these photographs so good? When the astronauts were in an environment they'd never been to before, they were under threat of imminent death from radiation, from heat exhaustion, because don't forget the moon is very hot when you're in the sun,
right,
and very cold when you're not. In fact, it's colder than anywhere on Earth when you're in the shadow. There's no atmosphere, that's why you have to have a spacesuit. And you're carrying a camera to take these photographs. It's a Hasselblad camera, the best camera